I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. I'm thrilled to have with me on my podcast, after having me on his, and we live near each other, which is rare in this day and age, Stephen Leahy. Welcome to Law Subscribed.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Matthew. Good to see you again, my friend.
Yes, likewise. So we met at, of all things, a local Chamber of Commerce meeting. Attorneys who use the subscription model are far and few between, growing in number, but the fact that we were in each other's backyard and we didn't even know it, we met each other in person, became fast friends, and we've already had a great conversation on your podcast, link to that in the show notes, of course. But just in case my listeners haven't come across you before, give them a brief introduction. Who are you?
Okay, so I'm a tax attorney. Took me some years to call myself a tax attorney, but I am a tax attorney. I help business owners with their tax problems. That practice has evolved into doing a little bit more than just solving IRS problems. Now, I like to think that we help businesses prosper, right? My goal is to help small businesses prosper. And sometimes you find yourself in problems with the IRS and you think there is no way out and the business is over. Doesn't have to be that way. And so that's what I try to work with my clients to, again, help them. I have a 5-step program. We can go into that later, but I want to walk my clients first, solve their problem, and then help to get them to help their business prosper by let us worry about your taxes.
Well, thanks so much for that, Stephen. And I do want to ask you about what you're doing. But even before we get into the specifics of what you're doing now, let's get your origin story, because you've been practicing law for a while. But I want to know, what's been your past experience? And the listeners want to know with how you build clients. Were you billing time? Were you doing fixed fees, some combination? And what was your journey from that to the subscription model?
Okay, so that's not really my origin story. My origin story goes much farther back than that, but I won't bore you with that. But I started out like everybody else. Maybe not. I was a little older when I went to law school than most. And so, when I was looking for a job, I didn't really look very hard because I always figured, actually, I'll be honest with you, I went to law school to start my own business. Mm-hmm. And I never thought I was going to practice law. It was always, I already had a business degree from Loyola here in Chicago. And someone said, well, you don't need to get an MBA because you already have a business degree. So you should go to law school. And so I did that because my dream was always own my own business. Little did I know that my business would be a law firm. And so when I got out of law school, I opened up an office, trying to see if I could get a job. And like everybody else, I just tried to find clients. Now, I think you probably agree with me. The hardest thing, and this has to do with subscriptions, right? One of the hardest things to do of any business, or the hardest thing, get customers, right? You could be really great at what you do, but if you don't have any customers, what good is it, right? So you spend a lot of time trying to do that. And I did that too. And I tried to, but almost immediately, I started a flat rate fee. Mm-hmm. And because it's hard to keep time, I just wasn't good at, writing it all down and making sure I got the time out. Also felt kind of subconscious, here you call me, I'm going to charge you every time we talk on the phone or every time you send me an email. It's like, I just always felt uncomfortable with that. So early on, I adopted a flat rate fee. So I started doing a flat rate fee. And it kind of worked well for me in the sense that I started doing bankruptcies. That's always a flat rate fee. And, whether it's a Chapter 7, and then I moved into Chapter 13, and those are flat rate fees, and you have to get them approved by the court. And so I kind of fell into the flat rate fee thing. And then I started doing foreclosure work because in 2008, a lot of the people that were looking for Chapter 13 turned out that they were in foreclosure.
Right.
And so I started helping people with foreclosures. And then again, with the foreclosure, I started with a flat rate fee. A lot of attorneys were charging the subscription plan. I left a lot of money on the table, to be quite honest with you. I did some foreclosure work, but little did I know that some of these foreclosures would go a year or more, right? Or a year and a half. And so,
right.
I wound up with a flat rate fee that should have been much higher, but I had already obligated myself on the flat rate fee side. And when I started helping people with taxes, same thing. I started doing flat rate fee. And again, one of the problems with the flat rate fee is, especially with taxes, is people would disappear for years at a time, and they'd come back and say, and they had paid me some flat rate fee, and now it's 3 years later, and their problem is 5 times worse, and I'm supposed to help them on it, right? And I would, because I had this agreement, flat rate
Right.
fee.
Right.
But I also learned I wasn't really helping them, right? In the sense that they had paid me and then they disappeared, and and they uh, and they never solved their problem, right? And so, one of the things that subscription, when I moved to the subscription plan, there's a number of reasons why I did it. And actually changed my life in the last 18, 24 months. It's changed the way we do our practice for the better, much better. A couple reasons why. I'm kind of a marketing student, right? And so I'm reading all these books about how best. One of the things, one of my go-to guys is a guy named Dan Kennedy. And
Mhm.
Dan Kennedy always talks about the value of a customer, right? As a lawyer, we spend all this time and effort and money to find a client, and then we help them, and then we're done. We're back looking for a new client, and it doesn't make any sense. So we're always looking for. So it's kind of the one and done, right? I'm done. Yeah, you come to me for foreclosure. It's over. We're done. I never see you again. Hopefully, sometimes people always say, "Steve, I'm so sorry, but I have to call you again. I'm having problems." Uh, but if and there's a synergy, right? When you find a good client and they like you and you like them and you're helping them, that that they need somebody that they can trust, and they're going to have other issues. And so when I started going taxes, now obviously taxes never go away. And one thing about the IRS is they don't go away either, even though you come up with might come up with a plan, but the plan might take 5 to 10 years to pay it. And so all along you have this relationship, like it or not, with the IRS. And so one of the things when you're in agreement with the IRS is that you're going to stay in compliance. That means you got to file your tax returns on time and pay on time. And a lot of people would come to see me and they haven't filed in 3 or 4 or 5 years. And then we get them all caught up. We get them into a plan. And guess what? They go right back to what they were doing before. Right. And so now all that work that I did, they're right back where they were. We haven't really solved their problem for them.
Right.
And so I tried to institute some sort of, and that's what subscription allows me to do, right? To
Right.
keep my relationship with them ongoing. And, I always, my clients they can fire me anytime they want. I'm on a monthly. I don't say, hey, you got to stay for a year. You got to stay for 2 years. You want to go, you're free to go. But then I don't help you, right? And you need help.
Right.
Right. And so again, it's not only helped me, it's helped my clients a lot. And that's really what it's all about, right? I'm trying to come up with a model that's going to help them.
I've met few attorneys, even ones that have been billing time for decades, that say they enjoy and they're good at billing time. So I don't think you're alone, Stephen, in that you were not good at it. I mean, there are attorneys that's all they've done, that's all they'll ever do, and they don't like it, and or they feel like they're not good at it, and they're leaving money, quote unquote, leaving
Yeah.
money on the table, right? Because
Yeah.
when you're able to deliver the same value faster, it's actually a greater value to your
Mhm.
client, and they'll
Mhm.
pay you the same amount whether it's several weeks from now and you spent 10 hours on it, or they get it tomorrow and you were able to do it using automations or whatever in an hour.
Actually, right, people will pay more for faster service, right? So
Sometimes,
so
yeah.
maybe it's more valuable to them if they get it faster. And I get one clear example of being a subscription attorney is, they don't worry about calling me and asking me a question, right?
Right.
Too many people who are billed hourly. It's like, if I call this attorney, if I just talk to him for a couple minutes, it's going to cost me a lot of money. But if I wind up talking to him for a long time, man, that's going to cost a lot of money.
Right.
And so what do they happens? They don't call and they don't get the answer.
Right. And attorneys and even in-house attorneys are seen as cost centers because of that. Meanwhile, somebody who's in taxes, even if it's true, like being a tax attorney, but like CPAs or tax planners, like they could show you how much money, you pay me X amount, but we'll save you 10 times that amount in your taxes. So like it's a little bit easier to see certain service providers as
Mhm.
revenue generators or
Mhm.
cost savers as opposed to cost centers. But yeah, but most people, if without subscription, they just look at their lawyers like they're just going to cost me money, right? And another thing I want to point out based on your like your legal origin story, if you will, not your total origin story. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough time for that, Stephen.
It's
But
interesting.
I believe it is, and maybe that's another
That's it.
podcast.
Like, how did I get to be a lawyer? Most people that knew me in high school, when I finally find out I'm a lawyer, they're like, "You're a lawyer?" It's like,
Hey,
yeah.
that does sound like an interesting story, but
No, I understand.
but the listeners want to hear about the
I get
subscription
it.
stuff. So, but another thing I want to pull out from that is the clients that disappeared when they're on subscription, when they're paying you every month, they're not going to disappear, which means you're going to be able to help them and they're not going to go off the face of the earth. I mean, look, they might continue to just let that monthly subscription come through and then they disappear, but it's much less likely. And so, one of the
Exactly.
common through lines of the podcast is aligning incentives between what's best for the client,
Mhm.
what's best for the lawyer.
Mhm.
And in particular in the tax space, like you were just explaining, like that meshes so well because
Mhm.
yeah, whether you like it or not, tax season comes every year.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely, and, when you mentioned CPAs and tax planning, we do both of those things, right? So, we've kind of evolved into that because we know that they need it.
Mhm.
Like bookkeeping, we're starting to do some bookkeeping. Why? Because that seems to be the biggest problem people have. They don't recognize it as the problem.
Right.
I learned that many people who had a tax problem, the real problem is they don't keep good records, right?
Huge.
And so
That's
to
huge.
to start keeping good records, because what happens, right? It comes time to do your taxes and you don't have records, you ask for an extension. Oh, I'll do it over the summer, but you don't do it over the summer. So I've had clients who haven't filed in 10 years, but every year they ask for an extension. So they have
Right.
every intention of doing their tax returns. They're just overwhelmed by the bookkeeping. So one of my favorite books is called Who, Not How.
Right.
And it teaches us, right? You have to start as a business owner, you have to start asking yourself, who can help me do this? Not how do I do it, right? Because you don't do it enough, right? You need help, and that's, seek a professional.
And that you found that that was where their problem originated. Like, and you're trying to address it even at the beginning with bookkeeping. Like that problem avoidance mindset is only going to happen when you're in the problem avoidance business. But if you're just billing hours and selling units of time, you're just going to solve the problems that come your way. You're not going to move up that problem chain. But it sounds like you did because you have enough clients. You're like, well, how can we solve this problem? We want to incentivize them to stay subscribed. Maybe there's other value here. They wouldn't traditionally pay an attorney to do bookkeeping, but it's related to the legal work that we're doing. So on a subscription, that makes sense. Maybe that's a more affordable tier. And
Mhm,
then maybe they
mhm.
get discounts on other services. So like how have you restructured your subscription, or have you even, or did you just add it as an added value? How'd you go about that when you started to look
Well,
into
I
that?
think the sign behind me here is the Open Tax Advocates, right? So we started a branch, Open Tax Advocates Inc. I'm the law office of Stephen A. Leahy. So we're moving a lot towards accounting because that's what people need,
Right.
right? And as a lawyer, sometimes there's barriers in the way of me providing some services that they need. And again, you really need finding a good accountant is like having the insurance, right? You have an insurance plan, you keep it for most of your life. You don't change insurance companies, right? Most people don't change their tax preparer. They find a tax preparer, they go to them every year. Not even if they don't like them. Why? Why? Because it comes to the time to do your taxes, and you got to rush and you got to get it done, and you already have somebody, right? And so I always tell people, if you find a accountant that you like, man, they're like gold. You should keep them. So even people who come to see me to fix a tax problem, if you have a good accountant, keep your accountant, because again, it's hard to find a good accountant.
Now, I ask my insurance broker to shop my insurance every year, but that's just because it keeps going up in this crazy world
It
that we're
does,
living
yeah, yeah.
in.
But you still use the same broker, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I do have no loyalty, but so far so good. So,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's right, right? And just like with that though, even though they're not styled as a subscription business. It's an annual subscription business,
Absolutely.
insurance, right?
Absolutely.
Like accounting firms that they just do your tax preparation every
Yeah,
year. That's an annual subscription.
it
But
is.
when you start thinking about those businesses in terms of an actual subscription business, the opportunities really open up.
Now we
Yeah.
could talk a little bit about that, about taxes, and one of the reasons why, another reason why I instituted the subscription plan. Value of my business, right?
Mhm.
If I have subscribers, the value of my business goes up many times. So maybe if I don't have any subscriptions, it might be 1 year's of revenue. But if I have subscribers, it might be 5 years of revenue, right? Because now I have a regular cash flow. So if I'm thinking about selling my business, and whether you are or not, you should always build your business as if you're going to sell it,
Mhm.
right? Because you're building value in that business. And subscription plans really let you do that. Build value in your business with the view to, hey, now it's more valuable to others. And if I mentioned that we do some accounting. So what I changed was we don't do annual fee. You come to me for a year, I charge you by the month.
Mhm.
So now you're a monthly subscriber. And what does that do? It makes me available to you, right? So you go to H&R Block, and I hate to use or or something that sounds like that. Go
Right.
go to what, and many of their offices are closed if between May and February the next year. So
Right.
there's nobody to talk to. There's nobody, and most so you got to have somebody that's available, that if you have a question, you can get an answer, and you don't have to worry about someone charging you for it because you're already paying for it. And it goes into the fee. So we do your taxes every year, right? We help people. Again, we're talking about bookkeeping. We're talking about things that people need and that we can help them with.
Right. I mean, I've been talking to my CPA and like other CPAs that I end up networking with about how they're sitting on a possible like amazing opportunity with their reoccurring
Mhm.
clients, not recurring revenue, right? Because if it's just reoccurring every year, then that's all that they have. They just have last year's revenue. If they ever want to, and look, I actually switched CPA firms in the last couple years because the firm I was with got acquired. So like CPA firms, more common than with law firms, are getting acquired.
Left and right.
So
Yes.
what you said, and
Yeah.
and also like what you're doing with Open Tax Advocates, that's a trade name.
Mhm.
That's not you're building not only a subscription revenue business but a brand as opposed to just somebody's name. Which you could
Oh.
you could do that, but talk a little bit about why you chose to
Uh,
go with the
uh, uh,
trade name.
Same reason I'm going to a subscription, right? You can't. Nobody wants to buy the law office of Stephen A. Leahy. There's only so many Stephen A. Leahy's out there, right? And so if you're trying to if your view towards selling, well, then you got to have a name to sell that could be a brand, and whether it's it just makes it so much easier. And that's what, again, people, when you're building your business, you should be building it with that in mind. How can I add value to my business to make it something? Because here's another thing: most business owners, many, they don't prepare for retirement. They don't have a pension plan. Your 401k is in your business, right?
Right.
That's where you have it. You're all in, and if that's you, then you should be thinking, well, at least I can have some business that has value. And so if it's time for me to retire, I can sell that business. I haven't put any money away because I've been plowing it into my business, but now my business is worth something.
And I also think, I mean, now realistically, mostly lawyers are listening to this podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
there's always the possibility that a potential client might be listening. But here's why I think it's really important for us to still, as small business owners, as professional services
Mm-hmm.
firms, to talk about that we're building a brand, and we're also we want to build a valuable brand that we may want to exit from one day. That is actually, I think the savviest and the best of clients for these professional services firms would like to hear that, because that means we're going to be putting 110% into our business to make it do a good job for the clients right now today so that it becomes saleable and more valuable in the future. So just because we're thinking about having the exit in mind, we're talking about it publicly in a podcast, that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Clients should be excited about that because that means we care about building a very successful business all the while we're professionals, because it is a relationship business. right?
Mhm.
At the end
Well,
of the
here's
day,
the
that's what we're
thing.
selling.
Here's the thing. Nobody lives forever,
Mhm.
right? And so, what's going to happen if your attorney hasn't prepared for the inevitable, right? And so, where's your case going to go? Where's your needs going to go, right? So you have to have that. Someone has to think about it. And another thing, lawyers are business owners. Okay, so I had you on my podcast. Generally interview attorneys like you, right? And almost all the attorneys, not everyone, but most of them own their own firm. They're business owners. Some don't think of themselves as that, but everybody is. And because in the end, that's what it's about, right? You're building a business, and so it's inevitable, and you should think of it that way.
Yeah, yeah. My listeners also love to hear, Stephen, so to the extent you can or want to talk about the technology that you're using. And that's from the payments perspective, the
Mhm.
onboarding perspective, the delivery of services perspective. And not everyone I have on my podcast has their fingers in the tech, but is that something that you want to talk to or speak about, or even like, I mean, frankly, we've had people on the show who've said, here, we tried this piece of technology and it didn't work for us, kind of a thing. So you could
Mhm.
tell those stories too, if you want.
Well, I'm a tech guy, as I spit for non-tech people. I happen to have an LLM in information technology law, and so I've been involved in tech all along. Well, a couple of things lawyers aren't good at. Tech is one, right? Running a business is another.
Right,
Right?
right.
All these kind of things that they were saying. The only thing that kept Word Perfect around as long as it did was lawyers, because they got used to. And that's all they wouldn't change, right? And so I've been implementing technology since the beginning of my practice. Always been a small one guy. I have a staff now, but I didn't always have a staff, and so I always used technology. I've been doing online consultations probably 13 years, maybe, but
Wow.
maybe more than that.
Yeah.
So I was early on in there. Used to send people a webcam whenever if they wanted to sign up, because they didn't have one at home. So I'd send it to them, and we'd have a meeting before Zoom. But so I back then, when I was new at it, almost every time I got somebody on an online call, I signed them. Right? It was because it was so different than most people. Now
Right.
today, we use a lot of VPN, and we have remote people like most businesses do now. I had already set it up before COVID. Now
Right.
we've expanded on it, and so we have staff that rarely, if ever, come into the office. They're all running off of VPN, and so our technology. I try to keep to the edge because I like it. I do this podcast myself.
I've been in your
And
studio. You've got a pretty good setup, I got to say.
I got the green room. And it's like some people have classic cars, right? This is my thing, right? So this is what I do.
And
Uh,
this is another reason why we got along right off the get go. It's not just because we go to the same barber.
well, that's true too. But I don't know. I don't know if obviously all technology doesn't work all the time.
Right.
I can't really put my finger on something that really didn't work. I probably moved on very quickly if
Right.
it didn't. I just put in AT&T 5G fiber in my office. We'll
Hmm.
see how that works. It hasn't worked yet, but we'll see how that works. I got when I moved into this office, and that's another thing technology's allowed me to do, is to move my office. I was downtown Chicago for 20 years, take a train, 3-hour commute every day for 20 years. And now my office is across the street from my house. And why can I do that? Well, one, because I've kind of get to the point where I can pay someone to go if I want to, but everything's on Zoom now, right? At
Yeah.
least for me,
Yeah.
right? Most of the court calls that I have, if I have some, you don't go to court a lot for tax. I do file tax court cases, but even most of those are done administratively. And so there's not a lot. If I do I've done some Chapter 11s recently, Chapter 11 bankruptcy cases.
Mhm.
Those are all online, so I don't have to worry about those. I still do
Amazing.
some bankruptcies, because bankruptcy is one of the remedies if you have a tax problem. Sometimes it's
Right.
the fastest, easiest way out. Most
Right.
tax attorneys don't do bankruptcies. And I always
Right.
tell people, if there's only 6 things you could do if you owe the IRS money, and one of them is bankruptcy, and your guy doesn't do bankruptcy, it kind of limits. what your
Yeah.
choices are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, and I still do probably a couple of foreclosures if people call, and that's all online. So I don't have to, so why be downtown when I could be across the street from my house? So much
Yeah.
better.
100%. It's amazing. And yeah, yeah. I mean, then on like the payment side, I remember I was talking with, I believe it was your wife,
Yeah.
about like Stripe and like some other payment processor stuff. Like, is that more her wheelhouse?
It
Like,
is, of
okay,
course, she's the one that deals with it I'm the one that set it all up, right?
right.
So because she's not really tech, but I am. So, it really becomes rudimentary in the sense that, it's just ubiquitous to our practice, right? So yesterday someone comes and, dude, nobody has checks anymore, right? It used to be you get a check, right? Nobody has a check, but they have their information and we take everything digital, right? As a subscription plan, right? Everything's on the ACH, right? So, it's automatic every month. And right there, that's a huge change. I remember when I implemented ACH, that changed my practice then, right? Just to get regular payments. Because even when I was working on a flat rate fee, my fee would be such that, and this is kind of what led me to subscription, right? Because
Mhm.
my fee would be such that they couldn't pay it all up front. So then we get, okay, you could pay me over a year. And so here's my flat rate fee, and then we'll split it over 10 months. Usually I would do because the math is easy. Right? So I'd say, okay, so it's whatever it is, 10% a month for 10 months. And we do an ACH and I don't have to wait for your check and I get paid. And again, that changed my practice because I remember one Christmas, actually October, November, nobody paid me, right? Nobody. And you're scratching your head. So remember, and then you start looking at cases. Oh, I remember helping that guy. He was in dire straits, and I helped him out of this hole that he was in, and this guy, and they're not paying me, but I can't blame them, right? Because they think I'm an attorney. I don't need the money, right? Because I'm an attorney. I don't know. People have that idea.
They do.
Well, I have Christmas, and he's rich, and so I'll catch up with him after Christmas. Well, it's just not true, right? All attorneys aren't rich
Right.
and they need their clients to pay them. But again, ACH changed that. It,
Yeah.
it it turned it around on me. But and that's why it became such an easy thing for me to move into subscription. So okay. So instead of taking the flat rate fee and saying, "Hey, you're going to pay me every month for 10 months," now it's like we take an upfront membership fee, and then you're going to pay me every month until you don't want to anymore. And again, because these cases seem to go on, and I've had clients that have been paying me for years, every month, and again, they don't have to. So obviously there's some value there for them. And that's what subscription is all about. Value. What kind of
Right.
value? If I'm not giving you any value, well, then you're not going to pay me every month. It just goes without saying.
So
And
then
so,
let's talk about like how you designed your value, and you could talk about specifics if you want. Again, you don't you can if you want to. You don't have to because not everybody listening. In fact, you're the first tax attorney we've had on the podcast, right? So like nobody's doing it in your space that
mhm,
I've talked to before, or even in a ancillary but related business to tax law, right? But defining those subscription benefits is one of those things, and also the earned fee of it all. Now, no ethics advice given on this
no,
podcast, right?
mhm,
But like how you define it, because even I mean, and this has been known for a long time. There have been different versions of this in the
mhm,
codes of professional conduct. But just making yourself available is value.
mhm.
So just being available is one aspect of value. But like, how did you
Well,
define your subscription? Yeah, how'd you do it?
that was always called a classic retainer,
Right.
right? And I kind of touched on this a little bit when I used to say I had a flat rate fee for foreclosures, and I saw other attorneys charging a classic rate, so got paid every month as long as they're on the whether a lawyer did any work or not, they get paid, right? And so that's kind of where I was. Now, again, one of the things I'm moving away from for open tax advocates is because of that, right? I don't want to. I want to make sure that I adhere to all the ethical principles and requirements. They're not just principles, right? They're
Right.
required.
Right. Right.
And so, I want to make sure that we follow those rules. But there is a classic retainer. I know it's changed a little bit here in Illinois recently, but that's kind of how I always presented it. And of course, I tell people that up front, right here. We're on a classic retainer. Sometimes that, what that means is I charge the same whether I do any work or not, right? And so,
Right.
but when we do a lot of work, you don't get paid extra, right? It's the same. It's
Yeah.
always the same, and
Right.
that's really where that comes from. And again, you have to. It's important, required even to follow these tenets and be aware of them, because some attorneys aren't even aware of them.
Right. Right. And it is one of those things where lawyers sometimes inadvertently don't. They're just not
Yeah.
familiar with
Mhm.
the rules and all that.
And what gets us have trouble with here in Illinois, it's the ARDC. It's almost always about money,
Mhm.
right? It's almost always. And so you have to make sure when you're handling money that it's upfront and you reveal everything and that you put the client first.
Yeah. Uh, how about like pricing tiers and pricing structures? Like, do you have a multi-tiered pricing system? Do you do custom pricing depending on the client's needs? Like, how do you handle? And again, you could choose whether or not to
Mhm.
discuss specific pricing, but let's at least talk about it broadly. Of how do you figure out how to tier it, how to price it, all that.
Well, and that's a very difficult thing, right? Because one size generally doesn't fit all, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it can. I think you and I were talking about, we have a membership, but I'm trying to set up a multi-layer tiered membership program,
Right.
mostly online, right? So that I can share some of I do a lot of videos. I have a lot of videos out there about how to do different things. And I think it could help a lot of people who can't otherwise or won't otherwise afford an attorney, right? So I have a lot of insight about what you should know if you owe the IRS money. I could sell that, that's already out there at again, people could find it. A lot of it's out there already. But if I can gather it and make it a value for you to come, whether it's $20 a month or $50 a month or $97 a month or whatever that is, we've been putting a lot of thought into the different, what they call a value ladder, right?
Right.
So, where people start at one level and you give them this value, they like it and say, well, what's next? What can you do to me? What can you do for me next? And then you reach them up to the next value ladder. And so, and this, these are my ideas. I mentioned Dan Kenny. I'm going to mention another guy. His name is Russell Brunson, that they talk about the click funnels. They talk a lot about this, about how to again, get people in, and then they need more, right? Because they learn about you, they like you, they need that service, and
Right.
so you can provide it for them. And I always look at it like, you're giving them an avenue to get the services that they need, instead of too many people like, oh, I already helped you, goodbye. Let's go to the next guy. Let me spend a whole bunch more money marketing to get another guy to get what he already needed and I didn't tell him about, right?
Right.
So, so that's such an important. It goes to, and this goes back to value of my company, right, and the value of a client, right? I mentioned Dan Kenny. I'm going to say it again. What he says is that whoever could spend the most to get a new client wins, right? And the only way you could spend more than your competitors on a client is if you make more on them. And the one way to make more on them is to have them long term, right? And to have a long term client that likes what you do, and buys from you all the time because they like you and you're giving them value. That's why they buy from you.
That's interesting. I didn't fully agree with all of that until you got to the last part, which is what we call in the subscription economy lifetime value, right?
Yeah.
If you're thinking about the long game,
Mm-hmm.
yes, my clients will probably pay me more
Mm-hmm.
over 30 years than
Mm-hmm.
they would pay some other lawyer that they only interacted with once or
Mm-hmm.
twice. But that other lawyer would make more money in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again,
And so,
so
right,
it's all about the lifetime value of a client. And
right,
so if they're worth more to me, but that also adds to the value of my business,
right.
because I have people who constantly buy from me. I'm not out searching for new customers all the time. I'm selling to the same people and they like it. And that's why they buy it.
Right. Right. The analogy I like to give, and I can't remember if I said this on your podcast. I probably did because I talk about this. I love this one. It's the apple analogy, right? Well, lawyers think they get one bite at the apple, so they're going to take the biggest,
Mm-hmm.
juiciest bite they could get. I think about I'm going to eat this whole apple. It's just going to be over time.
Mm.
And then somebody, I can't remember if it was you or somebody else, was like, then you'll take the core of that apple, you'll plant it, you'll grow an apple tree, and then you'll eat a bushel of apples
Yeah.
from that same client over time if
Yes.
it ends up being a good client, right? Where that one lawyer, they just got one bite at the apple from that client, and that
Mhm.
was it.
And I don't blame the attorneys. But because this is the way people think, right? And that's why subscription attorneys think differently, right?
Yeah.
Because we think more of a. And again, like I have when you have a subscription base, you have more of a personal relationship with your clients. Now, again, it's just still a professional relationship, but we have events where we bring our members to the Bulls game or some other events that we hold throughout the year because we want to keep in contact with them.
Right.
And I have a monthly newsletter that I send out, mail. It's a mail newsletter, and it's got a lot of about what I think and what I do, and to keep them in touch with me, right? Because we have this relationship,
Right.
and that's so important.
Right. And everything ebbs and flows, right? And so doing something that's that personal touch, it's the tactile thing that reminds your subscribers of you. That's really interesting. Like, I
Mhm.
think you're the first person I've had who says like one of the subscriber benefits is like a monthly physical, newsletter thing. I think that's amazing. And there would be a time where I would say, that's trite or that's old fashioned or whatever, but I think in today's world, if like I'm thinking now, how could I incorporate something like that into as a subscriber benefit for my clients, right? Because it's probably a marginal cost at scale, to do something like that
Well, I'm
on
gonna
the
tell
printing.
you, staying in touch with your clients is key, right? Because if you're in touch with them and they can call you, right? Because otherwise they'll just like, well, what am I paying this guy every month if I haven't heard from him in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or whatever it is,
Right.
right? I don't even know anything about him anymore, right? So the keeping in touch with that client, and I hear my my bookkeeper talks about my wife. She's not a big fan of the newsletter, but I am, right? And I'm a big fan of it. She's, well, you know what that costs, and I know it does cost. And I had a client some years ago. He was the best storyteller. He was a writer, best storyteller I ever met. He was on my radio show when I used to have this radio show, and he told me, Steve, I really like your show, but it's 80% law and 20% you. He said, you need to switch that around. You got to be 80% you and 20% law. And so that's kind of where my marketing is now ever since then. And it's really true, right?
Yeah.
In that your clients have a relationship with you.
Hmm.
Yeah, you know all these things, and you can dumbfound them with my ability to cite the IRS code, but nobody cares. They don't care about the IRS code. What they care about is that I know the IRS code, right? And so I'm the one that's going to have so I don't bury them with particulars that they don't care about, right? But I want them to care about me, right?
Yeah.
As I care about them.
That was fantastic advice you got from that client. Yeah, and a lot of lawyers, they'll do 99% the law, 1% them, right?
Yeah,
Like most.
yeah,
So you were already like, more talking about yourself than most lawyers
yeah,
who I
yeah.
know. You said one more thing though, because I could go over a few minutes if you want to, but we have 10 more
Sure.
minutes left, and so I do want to ask you because you brought it up. You said attorneys using subscriptions think differently, and what I want to know is from you. Did you always think differently? Or was it that after you had the aha moment of subscriptions the way to go, now you started to think differently, or was it like a combination of the two?
Well,
What's different about Stephen Leahy that made you want to do this?
as I mentioned, I always wanted to run my own business. That's really what it was about.
Hmm.
And law became my avenue for that. And as I said, I help a lot of business owners. Almost all business owners have done another business before they get to the business that makes them money, right?
Right.
I always tell people, when you find a business that's profitable, hold on to that business because it's not easy, right? And
No.
and so you should do whatever you can to protect that business, and that means keeping good records and all these things that I talked about to
Right.
protect that business and make it everything. So for me, it was pretty much of a kind of what I was. That's you have a customer, you want to make them happy. Subscription, and again, for my practice, it fell right into line. I used to
Right.
do this thing, we used to call it the IRS protection plan. And it was kind of an afterthought. After I learned that people needed me after I helped them, then I was, well, let's try to put them on this IRS protection plan. But that was an afterthought, and I wasn't very good at that. But when I read the subscription book, and I forget the name of it's subscription, but I forget the author.
Is it Subscribed by Tianzhou? Is that the one?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I read that book, the next day I implemented the
Yeah.
the subscription. I just said, now we're going to sell our IRS protection plan the day I assign you.
Right,
you're
right.
in it. You're in the plan,
Well,
and so that changed everything.
this is your entrepreneurship brain at work, though, and that is a through line, by the way. Like, an entrepreneur's brain is like thinks differently than like the average lawyer or
Yeah,
person in general. But that was another example of the 80-20 being flip flopped, right? Like, that was like you did it again. You did it with your copy and the way you were interacting with clients, and then you did it with your business model. Boom.
yeah. I hate to talk about books all the time, but some books changed my life, right? So one of them was that one. One of them was You Don't Learn to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. Ever heard of that book?
No, that one I haven't. I've heard of
Okay.
every other book you've mentioned, every other person, but not
That
one.
is that's a sales book. That's another book, changed my life.
Yeah.
In that book, what he tries to tell you is ask questions, right? Listen to what you're trying to fit what they need, and stop trying to tell them what they need, and listen to your customer and listen to what they need, and then give them what they need. And that's really changed everything. And that's one of those things too, that I read that book, or I actually went to a seminar, and because you can't ride a bike there, but you can learn how to sell. And the next day I implemented it and changed. It's like I closed somebody or two people that I never thought I would close. And it just, and that from then on, it's really changed everything.
Yeah. One more thing I want to ask you about is the multi-jurisdictional practice of it all. Because if you're in the tax space, I mean, there's obviously the federal tax code. Now, there is some state tax and some other state issues or what have you. But is having the practice and open tax advocates, like, what has that done for your business, in regards to it's multi-jurisdictional? Like, so, like, are most of your clients still in Illinois? Do you have clients and customers from outside the state? Like, what has that looked like for you?
Yes, most of my clients are Illinois clients. I have helped people out throughout the nation because as an IRS, that's multi-jurisdictional.
Mhm.
I have what they call enrolled agents who work for me, and enrolled agents are also multi-jurisdictional, right?
Right.
They're approved by the IRS. I've helped people with state taxes also, and I've never, not that many, but I have done some, and that's another reason why maybe open tax advocates with an EA doing it outside of a law firm. That way, I can't be accused of practicing law without a license,
Right.
right? And I don't want to go down that road. But I'm licensed in Tennessee also, so I haven't really done a lot of marketing there, and I don't have a lot of clients there, but it could change.
Yeah. It reminds me of what, I don't know if you're familiar with this. We might have talked about this or not, but Erin Levine, she started Hello Divorce because her law firm, some people came into her law firm that they were looking for divorces, and it was too expensive. So she did a productized divorce platform built on one of the sponsors of the podcast, Gavel. It was when she originally built it. Gavel used to be known as Document. It's Gavel now. And it was not a law firm. But if they decided they wanted to hire a law firm, they would hire her law firm. So it was like very clearly, and she's won a bunch of awards and all that. So like she had a distinct line between Hello Divorce, the productized divorce do-it-yourself service, and her law firm. But when they did it themselves, and they ultimately decided, I want to hire a law firm, her law firm was there. And I still don't really know how she did that from like, did they get a discount? Two totally separate, distinct entities were just going to nudge you towards that. But like, she made it work. So if she could do that, and
I'm going to look into that because I think that's interesting.
yeah, I mean, because that's a similar thing, it sounds like, as to what
Mhm.
open tax advocates is to the
Mhm.
law of Stephen A. Leahy, right?
And you were mentioning that once the different levels, right? So you have the do it yourself DIY, which is the first level that we talked about. Then it's done with you, where maybe a group of people you can do seminars or something about answering questions for people. And then you have done for you, and the
Right.
done for you is the higher end, obviously, but not everybody needs or wants or or can afford a done for you, right?
Right.
I, I modest but not proud, and modest say I'm not cheap, right?
Right.
I'm not a cheap attorney. I'm lucky to have people that want to hire me, right? And one other good advice that I got from a marketing guy was, Steve, people with money need your help too. that changed my life
That's
also.
good. That's a good line.
Because I was helping people with
Yeah.
bankruptcies, and it was like, it's like they don't have any money, and they're
Right.
struggling. But people with money need your help too.
That's
And
good.
and and there's nothing wrong or evil about helping people who can pay you, right?
Right.
It's not a bad thing.
Right.
Some attorneys don't want to talk about money, but in the end, they still have to pay their mortgage, and they have to, you got to pay your rent. You got all of that. Still got to get done.
Right.
And so in the subscription plan again has helped in that sense, because I know a very good estimate about what I'm going to bring in next month, right?
Yeah.
What did I bring in last month, right?
Yeah.
And so that makes a huge difference between the roller coaster of a lawyer, right? I get a bunch of cases, and then I get nothing. And I've lived it.
Yeah. And in particular, when doing tax planning,
Yeah.
if you have recurring revenue, it makes tax planning a heck of a lot easier as a business owner.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. So with that, I'll ask you the last question I ask all my guests, and that is why my listeners stay to the end of the show. And that is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
Well, okay, so I'm the hot dog guy, okay, because I have a hot dog stand. And so I've been asked this question many times. And the answer is, of course, it's a sandwich. It's between two pieces of bread. Now, people say, well, the bun is only one piece of bread, but it's really split. And so all bread is one piece of bread until you split it, right? So it's a hot dog is a sandwich. It's one of the best sandwiches out there, especially when you put a Chicago hot dog in it and put all those, drag it through the garden, as we say here in Chicago.
That's great. That's great. I was not expecting that. So you stick around for a minute if you can, but let's sign off and give them all the links. So if anybody wanted to follow up with you, learn more about what you do, connect with you, where's all those places?
This is what I suggest you do. I have a daily newsletter that I talk about all these tax stuff and all things that business owners need to know. And the lawyers are business owners, and so it's good for your listeners or viewers, right? Go to fightbacknow.com. Sign up for the free newsletter. That's where you start. And then, obviously there's other things there, but that's where, if you have any interest and you're a business owner, and if you're watching this podcast, you are, then go to fightbacknow.com, sign up for the free newsletter. If you don't like it, cancel it. Don't cost nothing.
Right. That's good. There's not always great call to actions when I ask people that question. That's a pretty good call to action. Well, like I said, stick around, but we'll sign off now. Stephen Leahy, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.